I spoke to Allan Friedman, visiting scholar at the Cybersecurity Policy Research Institute at George Washington University here in Washington, D.C., and I asked him about how China will respond to deal with cybersecurity.
Every policy challenge that China's faced has been at a larger scale than anyone else has ever looked at before. What makes it have some advantages over other countries that are very large is it does have a fairly organized public policy instruments and apparatus. It can say, identify certain priorities and move forward. At the same time, it faces the same challenges that every other country has, which is in addition to securing its own infrastructure, government infrastructure, public infrastructure, private infrastructure, it has to balance it against other priorities, not just national security, but trade. How is it going to sort of promote its own domestic industries at the expense of other industries, and how does it balance?
In China, China has a fairly strong control of the internet. I don't think that's a big secret. Who will they partner with, and what will their first task likely be?
Well, again, whenever you're talking about cybersecurity, it's important to understand what your goals and what your threats are. If you're trying to deal with something like critical infrastructure, usually the first step is going to be understanding what you have and what the scope is. Even if most of it is under the control of a government or government-related agencies, there are going to be vendors, there are going to be sort of third parties that are involved in providing key aspects. You want to know what you have, what your dependencies are, and then start prioritizing your risks. One of the big important terms that we need to talk about when we're talking about security is this word resilience. And that has to be a government priority because resilience is this notion that you're under attack, whether it's from criminals or foreign governments or terrorists. You want to make sure that if you can't prevent the attack completely, you can survive and adapt and rebuild. Now, that's a hard problem. That requires having flexible bureaucracy. It requires having people take the initiative. It's an organizational problem and it's an economic problem, not a technical problem. It's been very difficult in the United States to think about that. We have our own issues with bureaucracy. China is really going to have to think about how to adapt its very powerful and efficient bureaucracy to be more adaptable.
Okay. How are they going to pay for it, and who's going to pay for this?
Where that money comes from to pay is going to be tricky. Ultimately, it has to come out of the economy, and the basic solution is going to be to find the actor who is in the best position to make the right decisions. So for example, in the banking sector, you say, listen, rather than saying the customer is responsible for making sure that their accounts are never hacked, we're going to push some responsibility onto the banks to say, listen, you can see what's going on. You can tell if all of this money is suddenly floating offshore to sketchy Russian organized crime centers. So you have a certain amount of responsibility. Society-wide, that involves many separate decisions, many separate discussions.
Very quickly, there's been some criticism of let's just take emails, for example. Some countries want Google to store their emails in the local country servers. Google, of course, for scalability reasons, wants to have it on one central server. The problem with that is who has access to it. I'm sure China is thinking the same thing, along with many, many countries. What's the solution to this?
You know, the challenge is when we say it's got to stay in country, we're really using a very old metaphor that doesn't understand how the global cloud works. When my data is in a Microsoft cloud or a Google cloud or an Amazon cloud or a German cloud, it's not just sitting on a disk somewhere. It's spread all around.
It's not just in one place, is what you're saying.
It's not just in one place. And when you try to say, well, listen, no, your data has to stay here, you introduce a lot of complications. One, you lose the efficiency. Two, you're not actually protecting it, right? What we've seen over the past few months is that if a foreign state wants your data, they're going to try to get it. And finally, what does it mean to say my data stays in this country? If I'm American, I go to China, and then I want to access my email. Is my email now in China or America, or is it in a third party? A global cloud says that doesn't matter. That's an immaterial question. When we try to impose national borders on the cloud, we really are going to have to break a lot of the technology we spent the last decade building.